The thunder of hooves cut through the dawn as Samantha Holloway gripped her Winchester rifle, watching the horizon with eyes as hard as the Montana mountains behind her. 5 men on horseback approached her homestead, and she knew exactly what they wanted, the same thing they'd been trying to take for months: the last piece of free grazing land in Whitetail Valley. It was 1885 in the Montana Territory, and Samantha had inherited the Double H Ranch after her father's passing 6 months prior. Since then, the Cattlemen's Association, led by the ruthless Edgar Blackburn, had tried everything from lowball offers to thinly veiled threats to get her to sell. "Miss Holloway," Blackburn called out, tipping his hat with mock politeness as he reined his horse to a stop 20 yards from where she stood on her porch. "Beautiful morning for reconsidering my offer." "The answer's still no, Mr. Blackburn," she replied, keeping her rifle visible but pointed at the ground. At 24, Samantha had learned that in the West, respect came from strength. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and the calluses on her hands testified to the months of hard work since her father's passing. $5,000 is more than generous for a spread this size, especially for a woman alone, Blackburn said, stroking his silver-streaked beard. The 4 men flanking him shifted in their saddles, hands hovering near their holsters. "This land is worth 10 times that, and we both know it," Samantha replied. "The Double H isn't for sale today or any day," Blackburn's face hardened. "You'll find it difficult to run a cattle operation without help, Miss Holloway. Ranch hands have a way of seeking employment elsewhere when certain pressures are applied." "Is that a threat?" she asked, raising her rifle slightly. "An observation," Blackburn replied smoothly. "Things happen out here. Cattle scatter, fences break, wells get poisoned. Tragic accidents." Before Samantha could respond, the sound of another rider approaching drew everyone's attention. A tall man on a chestnut stallion rode up from the East Trail. His face was partially obscured by his wide-brimmed hat, but Samantha could see he was young, perhaps 30, with several days' worth of stubble on his tanned face. "Seems I've arrived at an interesting moment," the stranger said, his voice carrying across the yard. He stopped his horse between Samantha and Blackburn's men, one hand resting casually on his saddle horn, the other near the Colt revolver on his hip. "This is private business," Blackburn said tersely. "Ride on, stranger." "Name's Nathan Yates," the man said, ignoring Blackburn and tipping his hat to Samantha. "Looking for work. Heard the Double H might be hiring." Samantha hesitated. She did need help. Her last ranch hand had quit 3 days ago after finding his cabin ransacked, but she wasn't sure she could trust this stranger who'd appeared from nowhere. "We're not," she began. "She's not hiring," Blackburn cut in. "In fact, Miss Holloway here was just about to sign over her deed to the Cattlemen's Association." Nathan's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the situation. "Doesn't look that way to me." He turned to Samantha. "Madam, I've got references from the Bar T in Wyoming and 3 years working cattle drives to Cheyenne. I can break horses, mend fences, and keep trouble at bay." His eyes flickered meaningfully toward Blackburn. Blackburn spat on the ground. "You're making a mistake interfering in local affairs." Nathan shifted in his saddle, and the movement caused his coat to fall open, revealing a silver marshal's badge pinned to his vest. "Former Deputy Marshal Nathan Yates, Wyoming Territory," he said. "I know the difference between business and intimidation, Mr. Blackburn." "Edgar Blackburn," the man replied, his confidence faltering slightly at the sight of the badge. "President of the Whitetail Valley Cattlemen's Association." "Well, Mr. Blackburn, seems to me 5 armed men surrounding a lady's home might constitute intimidation in these parts." Nathan's voice remained casual, but his eyes had turned to flint. Blackburn glared at him, then at Samantha. "This isn't over, Miss Holloway. Think about my offer. It won't stay open forever." He jerked his horse around. "Let's go, boys." Samantha watched them ride away, dust billowing behind them. Only when they disappeared from sight did she lower her rifle completely. "I didn't need your help," she said, turning to Nathan. He smiled, and she noticed the creases around his eyes, evidence of years squinting against the sun. "Never said you did, madam, but that offer of work was genuine." Samantha studied him carefully. "That badge real was," Nathan replied. "Turned it in 2 months ago, decided I'd rather work with cattle than outlaws, less shooting, better company." "Why here?" she asked, suspicion still evident in her voice. "Plenty of big outfits hiring." Nathan dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "Heard about a spread where the owner wasn't afraid to stand her ground, thought that might be the kind of place worth working for." He paused. "Plus, I've got no love for men who use their power to bully others." Samantha considered him for a long moment. She did need help desperately, but trusting strangers wasn't a luxury she could afford. "1 week," she finally said. "Trial basis. You sleep in the bunkhouse, meals included, $1 a day plus keep." Nathan nodded. "Fair enough." "And I'll need those references," she added firmly. "Of course." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out 2 folded papers. "Judge Wilson in Cheyenne and Mr. Thornton of the Bar T." He handed them to her. "They'll vouch for me." As Samantha took the papers, their fingers brushed briefly. She ignored the unexpected tingle that ran up her arm. "First job is repairing the north fence line. Someone cut it last night and 20 head wandered off." "Yes, madam," Nathan said, already turning toward his horse to retrieve his belongings. "I'll get started right away." Samantha watched him lead his horse toward the bunkhouse, trying to quell the sense of relief washing over her. She couldn't afford to rely on this stranger, no matter how timely his arrival had been. But for the first time in months, she felt like she might have a fighting chance to save her father's legacy. What she didn't know was that Nathan Yates had his own reasons for coming to the Double H, reasons that went far beyond a job or a chance encounter with Blackburn's men. Reasons that could either save her ranch or cost them both everything. The sun beat down mercilessly as Nathan mended the fence line, driving each post deep into the resistant earth. Sweat soaked his shirt as he worked, occasionally glancing up to scan the horizon. 3 days had passed since his arrival, and he'd already spotted Blackburn's men watching the property twice. In the distance, he could see Samantha herding the recovered cattle back toward the ranch. She rode with natural grace, her commands to her horse barely visible but perfectly executed. She was clearly a woman who'd grown up in the saddle. As she approached, Nathan hammered in the final nail on a section of fence. "You work fast," Samantha observed, dismounting and tying her horse to a remaining post. "Helps to know what I'm doing," Nathan replied with a slight smile, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "Where'd you learn ranch work? Thought you were a lawman." Nathan collected his tools, placing them in a worn leather bag. "Grew up on a small spread in Colorado, worked cattle since I could walk." He straightened up. "Took the badge after rustlers killed my pa, figured I could do more good upholding the law." "What changed?" Samantha asked, passing him a canteen. Nathan took a long drink before answering. "Realized I was becoming something I didn't recognize. Too many compromises, too many times looking the other way when rich men broke the law." He handed the canteen back. "The last straw was when a cattle baron had 3 homesteaders' land seized on false claims. Judge was in his pocket." Samantha's eyes narrowed. "Like Blackburn's trying to do here." "Exactly like that," Nathan agreed, "though he seems to prefer intimidation to legal maneuvering." "For now," Samantha said. She glanced toward the distant mountains. "My father spent 30 years building this ranch, started with nothing but a plot of land and 10 head of cattle." Pride mixed with sorrow in her voice. "When he died, Blackburn showed up at the funeral with an offer." "Vulture," Nathan muttered. "He said a woman couldn't run a cattle operation alone, that I'd be doing my father's memory a service by selling to someone who could preserve his legacy." She snorted, as if turning his life's work into part of Blackburn's empire would honor him. Nathan studied her face, the determination in her green eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. "Your father would be proud of how you fought." "I haven't won yet," she replied grimly. Blackburn controls the Cattlemen's Association, has the bank president in his pocket, and owns the only cattle buyer who comes through here regularly. Which is why you need to get your herd to Billings for the autumn market, Nathan said. It wasn't a question. Samantha looked at him in surprise. How did you know? It's what I do in your position. Bypass Blackburn's buyer, get a fair price from the eastern buyers. With the railroad extension, Billings is becoming the new cattle hub. That's the plan, Samantha confirmed. But I need at least 3 hands to drive the herd, and no one local will work for me now that Blackburn's put out the word. Nathan secured his tools on his horse. Well, you've got 1 hand already. 1 isn't enough. 2 might show up tomorrow, Nathan said casually. Friends from my martial days. Good men who know cattle and can handle trouble. Samantha stared at him. You sent for them without asking me. I sent a telegram before I left town yesterday, Nathan said, meeting her gaze steadily. After I saw Blackburn's men cutting your fence line again. You saw them, Samantha's voice rose. Why didn't you stop them? Would have been 2 against 1 with no witnesses. Better to fix the fence and prepare properly. Nathan mounted his horse. You need more than just 1 hired hand, Miss Holloway, especially if you're planning a cattle drive. Samantha mounted her own horse, her movements sharp with frustration. You should have consulted me first. Would you have agreed? She said nothing, which was answer enough. They rode side by side back toward the ranch house, the tension between them palpable in the late afternoon heat. As they crested the last hill before the homestead came into view, Nathan reined his horse to a stop. Miss Holloway, he said quietly, I understand your reservation about trusting strangers, but this isn't just about a job for me. What is it about then? She challenged. Nathan looked out over the valley, his expression distant. There are certain wrongs I couldn't right with a badge. This is a chance to balance the scales. Samantha studied his profile, noticing for the first time the small scar that ran along his jawline. You have a personal grudge against Blackburn, not Blackburn specifically, Nathan said. But men like him? Yes, he turned to meet her gaze. I've seen what happens when good people are pushed off their land by those with money and influence. It doesn't end with just 1 ranch. So I'm some kind of cause for you? Samantha asked, uncertain whether to be offended. Nathan shook his head. No, madam, you're someone fighting for what's rightfully yours. I respect that. He paused. And I think your father would have appreciated knowing someone was watching your back. The mention of her father softened Samantha's expression. After a moment, she nodded. Your friends can stay in the bunkhouse, but they work for me, not you. That clear? Crystal clear, Nathan agreed with a small smile. As they continued toward the ranch, Samantha found herself studying Nathan more carefully. There was something about him that didn't quite fit the typical drifting cowhand. His mannerisms were too measured, his observations too perceptive. And those references, while genuine, had seemed almost too perfect, as if carefully selected. What she didn't know was that Nathan had indeed chosen his references strategically. What he hadn't mentioned was that Judge Wilson was his uncle, or that the trouble he'd left behind in Wyoming involved putting a bullet in the shoulder of a corrupt sheriff who'd been on a cattle baron's payroll. And he certainly hadn't mentioned that he knew exactly who Edgar Blackburn was long before he ever rode onto the Double H. The next morning, Samantha woke to the sound of horses in the yard. Dawn was just breaking as she pulled on her boots and grabbed her rifle, a habit she'd developed over the past months of trouble. Through the window, she could make out 3 riders dismounting near the corral. Nathan emerged from the bunkhouse, greeting the men with handshakes and backslaps that spoke of long acquaintance. Samantha pulled her shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. The men immediately removed their hats as Nathan led them toward her. Miss Holloway, Nathan called. These are the friends I mentioned, Samuel Cooper and William Jenkins. The 2 men nodded respectfully. Cooper was older, perhaps in his 40s, with weathered skin and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Jenkins was younger, closer to Nathan's age, with broad shoulders and a friendly face. "Madam," Cooper said, "Nathan speaks highly of you and your operation." "Does he?" Samantha replied, raising an eyebrow at Nathan. "Considering he's been here less than a week, that's quite an assessment." Jenkins smiled. "Nathan's always been a good judge of character. It's what made him a fine lawman." "And what brings you gentlemen to Montana?" Samantha asked. "Nathan mentioned you were former lawmen as well." Cooper and Jenkins exchanged glances. "Similar reasons to Nathan, I suppose," Cooper said carefully. "The law doesn't always serve justice. Sometimes a man needs to find other ways to make things right." "We heard you might need hands for a cattle drive," Jenkins added more directly. "We both have experience. I worked 3 seasons on the Kishome Trail, and Cooper here ran his own outfit before joining the territorial marshals." Samantha looked at the 3 men, suspicion mingling with desperate need for their help. $1 a day plus meals. Drive to Billings leaves in 2 weeks, assuming we can gather the herd and keep Blackburn from interfering. "Speaking of Blackburn," Nathan said, Cooper brought news from town. "Blackburn's hired a new gun hand, goes by the name Reeves, has a reputation from down Texas way." Samantha's stomach tightened. "A gunfighter," Cooper nodded grimly. "The kind that doesn't ask questions about who he's shooting at." "Well, that's just perfect," Samantha muttered, running a hand through her loose hair. "As if we didn't have enough problems." "It means Blackburn's getting desperate," Nathan pointed out. "He wouldn't bring in hired muscle unless he was planning something soon." "Or unless he knows what we're planning," Samantha countered. Nathan frowned. "I was careful in town. No one overheard me sending the telegram." "Someone might have seen you at the telegraph office," Cooper suggested. "In small towns like this, people notice strangers." "We need to speed up our timeline," Nathan said after a moment of thought. "Get the cattle rounded up faster, leave for Billings earlier than planned." Samantha shook her head. "The cattle are scattered across 3 grazing areas. Even with 4 of us, it'll take at least 10 days to gather them all." "Not if we work smart," Cooper interjected. "When I ran my outfit in Colorado, we developed techniques for quick roundups during Indian troubles. With your permission, Miss Holloway, I think we could get it done in 6 days." Samantha looked at the men's faces, all confident, all seemingly competent. Still, doubt nagged at her. This was happening too fast, and she barely knew these men. "Miss Holloway," Nathan said softly, sensing her hesitation, "I understand your concern. But right now, we have the advantage of surprise. If Blackburn knows we're planning something but not exactly what or when, that's our edge." After a moment's consideration, Samantha nodded. 6 days to round up, then we drive for Billings, but I want to be clear, this is my operation. I may be a woman, but I've worked cattle my whole life. I give the orders." "Yes, madam," all 3 men responded almost in unison. "Cooper, Jenkins, get your gear stowed and your horses settled," she instructed. "We'll have breakfast, then ride out to the north pasture to start the gather." As the men moved toward the bunkhouse, Nathan lingered behind. "You're doing the right thing," he said quietly. "I don't have much choice," Samantha replied. She studied his face in the morning light. "Nathan, I need to know, are you being straight with me about why you're really here?" Nathan held her gaze steadily. "I've told you what matters, the rest. Well, it's in the past." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I can give right now," he replied. "But I give you my word, I'm here to help you keep this ranch, not for any other reason." Something in his tone made Samantha believe him, despite her misgivings. "Get some coffee and breakfast," she said after a moment. "We've got a long day ahead." As Nathan walked toward the house, Samantha remained on the porch, watching the sun climb over the eastern hills. Her father had always told her that the dawn held promises that no other time of day could offer. She hoped desperately that today's sunrise was promising salvation for the Double H, not its final days. What she couldn't know was that as the men prepared for breakfast, Cooper was quietly updating Nathan on other news from town news about Blackburn's connections to the territorial governor, and rumors of a new railroad spur that explained Blackburn's desperate interest in the Double H land. information that Nathan absorbed with a grim expression that would have confirmed all of Samantha's suspicions had she seen it. The following days passed in a blur of dust, sweat, and the constant bawling of cattle as the 4 riders worked from dawn until dusk gathering the scattered herd. Cooper's methods proved effective. They worked in pairs, using the natural contours of the land to funnel the cattle towards central collection points before driving them back to the home pasture. By the 4th day, they had gathered nearly 2/3 of the herd. Samantha found herself working alongside Nathan more often than not, impressed despite herself by his skill with cattle and horses alike. "You handle that cutting horse like you were born to it," she commented as they paused on a ridge overlooking a small valley where a group of steers grazed. Nathan patted his horse's neck affectionately. "Thunder here does most of the work. I just stay on and look competent." "False modesty doesn't suit you," Samantha replied with a small smile. "I've been around cowboys my whole life. You've got a gift." Nathan adjusted his hat against the late afternoon sun. "My pa believed working cattle was an art, not just a job. He taught me to read their movements, anticipate what they'd do before they knew themselves." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." A shadow passed over Nathan's face. "Lost him when I was 18. Rustlers hit our place while I was in town, shot him when he tried to stop them." Samantha's expression softened. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," Nathan said, though his eyes told a different story. "Does it get easier?" Samantha asked quietly. Losing a parent, Nathan considered her question. "Not easier, different. The sharp pain dulls, but the absence never quite goes away." He looked at her. "How long since you lost your father?" 6 months, she replied, her throat tightening. "Pneumonia took him after he got caught in a blizzard bringing strays home." "He must have been a strong man to build all this," Nathan said, gesturing to the rolling pastures. "He was," Samantha agreed. "Stubborn too. Said this valley was the closest thing to heaven he'd ever seen, and he'd die before he'd let anyone take it from him." She laughed softly. "I guess I inherited that stubborn streak." "It's serving you well," Nathan observed. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Samantha was the first to look away, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of being alone with this man she barely knew, despite the circumstances. "We should head back," she said, turning her horse. "Cooper and Jenkins will have the Western group gathered by now." As they rode side by side down the slope, Samantha found herself stealing glances at Nathan's profile. There was something comforting about his presence, a quiet strength that reminded her of her father. What troubled her was the growing awareness that her interest in Nathan Yates wasn't entirely professional. In the midst of fighting for her ranch, the last thing she needed was the distraction of feelings for a man who would likely ride away once the cattle drive was complete. That evening, as they sat around the kitchen table reviewing their progress, Cooper spread out a map of the territory. "We've gathered about 300 heads so far," he said, marking locations with a pencil. "Based on your count, Miss Holloway, that leaves roughly 200 still scattered in these areas." He circled 2 regions on the map. "The northeastern section will be the hardest," Samantha noted. "It borders Blackburn's property and the boundary's been disputed for years." "Has he ever tried to claim those cattle as his own?" Jenkins asked. "Twice," Samantha confirmed. "Both times my father confronted him with the brand records. Blackburn backed down, but I don't think he will now that Pa's gone." "We'll need to be careful then," Nathan said. "If Blackburn's new gun hand is watching that border, crossing over even accidentally could give them the excuse they're looking for." "I don't care about excuses," Samantha said firmly. "Those are Double H cattle and we're going to bring them home." "No one's suggesting otherwise," Nathan assured her. "But we need to be smart about it. Cooper and Jenkins can work the southern section tomorrow while you and I handle the northeast. That way, if there's trouble, we can watch each other's backs." Cooper and Jenkins exchanged a glance that Samantha couldn't quite interpret. "Sounds reasonable," Cooper said. "We should be able to finish the southern gather in one day." "What about Blackburn's men?" Samantha asked. "They've been suspiciously absent these past few days." "That's what worries me," Nathan admitted. "Either they don't know what we're doing, which seems unlikely, or they're planning something bigger than fence cutting and intimidation." "All the more reason to finish the gather quickly," Jenkins said. "The sooner we get on the trail to Billings, the better." As the men retired to the bunkhouse, Samantha remained at the table, studying the map. The northeast pasture had always been her father's favorite rich grassland fed by a year-round spring. It was also the most valuable section of the Double H and the one Blackburn coveted most. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Nathan standing on the porch, hat in hand. "Forgot to mention something," he said. "We should leave at first light tomorrow to reach the northeast section early. Give us the full day to work those cattle." "I was thinking the same thing," Samantha replied. "I'll have coffee and biscuits ready before dawn." Nathan nodded, then hesitated. "There's something else you should know before tomorrow. When Cooper was in town, he heard rumors about why Blackburn wants your land so badly." Samantha leaned against the doorframe. "I already know why. The water rights alone make it valuable, especially in drought years." "It's more than that," Nathan said. "There's talk of a railroad spur coming through the territory. The surveyors have already marked a route that cuts right through your northeast pasture." Samantha straightened. "A railroad, are you certain?" Cooper's source is reliable. "A clerk at the land office who owed him a favor." "That would explain Blackburn's sudden urgency," Samantha murmured. "Land with rail access would be worth 10 times its current value." "Exactly," Nathan agreed. "And Blackburn likely has inside information from the railroad company. If he can get your land before the plans become public, he stands to make a fortune," Samantha finished, anger rising in her voice. "That underhanded, conniving, this actually works in our favor," Nathan interrupted gently. "It means he's operating on a timeline. If we can hold out until the railroad plans become public, other buyers might appear, ones willing to pay what the land is truly worth." Samantha shook her head. "I'm not selling to anyone. This is my home." Nathan studied her face in the lamplight. "Even with a fair price. Enough to start fresh somewhere else." "There is no somewhere else for me," Samantha said firmly. "My mother is buried on that hill behind the house. My father spent his life building this ranch. Their memory is in every acre of this land." She met his gaze directly. "Would you sell your father's legacy?" Nathan's expression softened. "No, I wouldn't, and I didn't mean to suggest you should." "Then why bring it up at all?" "Because I want you to understand what we're up against," Nathan said. "Blackburn isn't just a bully with too much power. He's a businessman who sees your ranch as the key to his future fortune. That makes him more dangerous than I initially thought." Samantha absorbed this information silently. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you for telling me. It helps to know what we're really fighting against." "Get some rest," Nathan advised. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As he turned to go, Samantha called after him softly. "Nathan," he paused, looking back. "Why are you really helping me? And don't tell me it's just about the job or some abstract sense of justice." Nathan was quiet for so long that Samantha thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. "Because 15 years ago, my family lost everything to a man like Blackburn. Because I watched my father die trying to protect what was rightfully his. Because I spent 10 years with a badge, thinking I could change things from inside the system, only to discover the system itself was corrupt." He took a deep breath. "And because when I rode up to your porch that first day and saw you standing your ground against 5 armed men, I recognized something I thought had died a long time ago: courage in the face of impossible odds." The raw honesty in his words left Samantha momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Nathan tipped his hat. "Dawn comes early, Miss Holloway. I'll see you then." As she watched him walk back to the bunkhouse, Samantha felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest. For the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel entirely alone in her fight. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting to have an ally she was beginning to trust, terrifying to acknowledge that her feelings for Nathan Yates were quickly becoming more complicated than employer and employee. What she couldn't know was that, as Nathan made his way back to the bunkhouse, his thoughts were equally conflicted. His determination to help Samantha fight Blackburn was genuine, but there was more to the story than he'd revealed. Much more. And he was beginning to fear that when the whole truth came to light, any chance of earning her trust permanently would be shattered. True to her word, Samantha had coffee brewing before the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. Nathan joined her in the kitchen as she packed biscuits and jerky for their day's ride. Cooper and Jenkins already headed out, he said, accepting the steaming cup she offered him. They wanted to reach the southern pasture by sunrise. Samantha nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at Nathan's presence in her kitchen. In the soft lamplight, with his hair still damp from washing and his face freshly shaved, he looked younger, less weathered by the years of hardship he'd hinted at. "We should reach the northeast boundary by mid-morning," she said, focusing on the task ahead. "There's a ridge overlooking the main valley where we can get a good view of the herd's location." They set out as the first golden rays of sunlight crested the eastern mountains, riding in comfortable silence through the awakening landscape. Birds called from the scattered pines, and twice they startled deer from their resting places. As they topped a rise overlooking a broad meadow, Nathan suddenly raised his hand, signaling Samantha to stop. "Riders," he said quietly, pointing toward the distant tree line. "3 of them moving along our boundary." Samantha squinted against the morning light. "Blackburn's men, most likely," Nathan confirmed. "They're on our side of the fence line." Anger flashed across Samantha's face. "Trespassing on my land, easy," Nathan cautioned, placing a restraining hand on her arm as she made to urge her horse forward. "That might be exactly what they want, draw us into a confrontation on disputed territory." "It's not disputed," Samantha insisted. "The boundary marker is clear that lightning struck oak at the edge of the meadow." Nathan nodded. "I believe you, but confronting them 3-2 isn't wise, especially if one of them is this Reeves' character." He studied the distant riders. "Let's circle around through that stand of cottonwoods. We can get closer without being seen." Reluctantly, Samantha agreed. They guided their horses down the backside of the ridge and through a dense grove of trees, emerging at a point closer to where the riders had been spotted. From their new vantage point, partially concealed by brush, they could see the men more clearly. 2 were ordinary ranch hands Samantha recognized from previous encounters with Blackburn. The third was a stranger tall and lean, dressed in black, with a pair of matched pistols worn low on his hips. "That'll be Reeves," Nathan murmured, his expression grim. "I've heard of him. Fast draw, deadly accurate, killed 7 men in Texas before moving north." "What are they doing?" Samantha whispered as the men dismounted near a small group of cattle clearly bearing the Double H brand. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he watched. "Looks like they're checking brands." Sure enough, one of the ranch hands was examining the brands on the cattle while Reeves and the other man stood guard, hands near their weapons. "They're planning to claim our cattle crossed onto their land," Samantha realized. "That gives them an excuse to impound them, or rebrand them," Nathan added darkly. "Common enough tactic." Samantha's hand moved toward the rifle in her saddle's scabbard. "I won't let them steal my cattle." "Hold on," Nathan said, studying the situation. "We need to be smart about this." He pointed to a rocky outcropping about 50 yards away. "If we position ourselves there, we'll have cover and a clear line of sight. I'll call them out, identify myself as a former marshal. Might make them think twice. And if it doesn't," Nathan's expression was grim, "then we hope they're not willing to commit murder over a few head of cattle." They moved carefully to the outcropping, leaving their horses secured behind it. With rifles in hand, they took positions behind the rocks. "Blackburn's men," Nathan called out, his voice carrying across the meadow. "You're trespassing on Double H land." The three men spun around, hands moving to their weapons. Reeves stepped forward, his posture relaxed but alert. "Who's calling?" he responded, his voice carrying a hint of a southern drawl. "Nathan Yates, former Deputy U.S. Marshal," Nathan replied. "And Miss Holloway, the rightful owner of this land and these cattle." Reeves chuckled. "Well now, we've got ourselves a genuine situation here. See, Mr. Blackburn says these cattle strayed onto his property. We're just returning them to their proper pasture." "That's a lie," Samantha called out. "You're 30 yards inside my boundary line and you know it." The ranch hand who'd been checking brands spat on the ground. "Boundaries in dispute, madam. Mr. Blackburn has documents saying this whole section belongs to the Diamond B." "Those documents are forgeries," Samantha replied angrily. "And you know it, Jackson. You worked for my father 3 years ago. You helped him repair this very fence line." The man named Jackson had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Reeves merely smiled. "Paperwork conflicts can be so troublesome," he said smoothly. "Perhaps Miss Holloway should discuss the matter directly with Mr. Blackburn. I'm sure he'd be amenable to negotiations." "The only negotiating I'll do with Blackburn is telling him exactly where he can go," Samantha shot back. Nathan placed a warning hand on her arm. "What's your plan here, Reeves?" he called out. "Rustle a few head to provoke a conflict, or is Blackburn hoping for something more permanent?" Reeves' smile faded. "You're outnumbered, Yates. Even ex-marshals can catch bullets. Why don't you ride on while you still can? This isn't your fight." "I made it my fight when I signed on with the Double H," Nathan replied steadily. "Now you boys have two choices. Ride back to Blackburn and tell him his land-grabbing days are over, or find out if those fancy pistols are good for anything but show." A tense silence fell over the meadow. Samantha could feel her heart pounding as Reeves considered his options, his cold eyes calculating. Finally, Reeves nodded to his companions. "Mount up, we'll settle this another day." As they prepared to leave, he looked directly at the outcropping where Nathan and Samantha were positioned. "Tell Miss Holloway to watch her back. Accidents happen out here in the wild country." They watched as the three men rode away, disappearing over a distant hill. "That was too easy," Samantha said, lowering her rifle. "Reeves doesn't strike me as the type to back down from a challenge." "He's not," Nathan agreed, his expression troubled, "which means they're planning something else. Something bigger than stealing a few cattle." "The railroad," Samantha murmured. "If Blackburn needs this land quickly." "He might be getting desperate enough to take more direct action," Nathan finished. "We need to finish gathering the herd and get moving to Billings as soon as possible." They spent the rest of the day locating and driving cattle back toward the home pasture, constantly watching for signs of Blackburn's men. By sunset, they'd gathered another 70 head, leaving perhaps 100 still scattered in the distant corners of the property. As they rode back to the ranch, exhausted from the long day, Nathan broke their comfortable silence. "Miss Holloway, Samantha," he began, using her given name for the first time. "There's something I need to tell you, something about why I'm really here." Samantha looked at him, noting the conflict in his expression. "I'm listening." Before Nathan could continue, they heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the direction of the ranch. Cooper appeared over the rise, riding hard. "Nathan, Miss Holloway." He called, reining his horse to a stop before them. "Blackburn's made his move. 6 of his men rode onto the property about an hour ago. Jenkins is keeping watch, but they've set up camp near the main corral. They're saying they have a court order to impound your cattle for unpaid debts." "What debts?" Samantha demanded. "The Double H doesn't owe anyone a cent." "They're claiming your father took a loan from Blackburn last year," Cooper explained grimly. "Say they have the paperwork to prove it." "That's impossible," Samantha insisted. "My father would never borrow from Blackburn." "Never?" Nathan's face had hardened. "Forged documents, most likely. Blackburn probably has the local judge in his pocket." "What do we do?" Samantha asked, looking between the two men. Nathan exchanged a meaningful glance with Cooper before answering. "We were planning to leave for Billings in 2 days. We moved that up to tonight." Tonight, Samantha repeated, but we haven't gathered the whole herd. We have most of it, Nathan pointed out. 300 head will still fetch enough to keep the ranch afloat until we can fight Blackburn's claims properly. He's right, Cooper added. If Blackburn's men impound your cattle, you'll never see them again. The court proceedings could drag on for months, and by then, the railroad announcement will be public. You'll lose everything. Samantha looked back toward her ranch, her home, visible in the distance with smoke rising from the chimney. The thought of leaving in the dead of night like a thief rankled her. But she recognized the logic in Nathan's plan. How quickly can we be ready? She asked, her decision made. 2 hours, Nathan replied. We'll need supplies for the trail, and we'll have to move the herd quietly past Blackburn's men. As they rode toward the ranch, Nathan's unfinished confession hung between them, momentarily forgotten in the urgency of their situation. But Samantha couldn't help wondering what he had been about to reveal, and whether it would change everything she was beginning to feel for him. The ranch yard was unusually quiet as they approached. From the cover of the trees, they could see Blackburn's men camped near the main corral, a small fire burning as they passed a bottle between them. Jenkins was nowhere in sight. "Where's Jenkins?" Nathan murmured to Cooper. "Watching the back trail," Cooper replied. Making sure no more of Blackburn's men show up unexpectedly, Nathan nodded. "Samantha, you'll need to go to the house for supplies. Cooper and I will ready the horses and prepare the herd for moving." "What about the men by the corral?" Samantha asked. "They're expecting us to challenge them directly," Nathan explained. "Instead, we'll slip the herd out through the east pasture. There's a draw there that leads to the Billings Road without passing near the main yard." "My father used it during spring drives," Samantha confirmed. "But moving 300 cattle quietly won't be easy." "We don't have to be completely quiet," Cooper said with a hint of a smile. "Just create enough distraction that they won't notice what we're really doing." The plan came together quickly. Samantha would gather supplies from the house while appearing to be simply going about her evening routine. Meanwhile, Cooper would create a distraction at the far side of the property, drawing Blackburn's men away from the corral. Nathan and Jenkins would then begin moving the herd toward the east pasture. "Be careful," Nathan told Samantha as she prepared to ride openly toward the house. "If they ask, you're just coming back from checking cattle. Don't let on that we know about their supposed court order." Samantha nodded, suddenly aware that this might be the last time she saw her home for weeks, possibly longer. "I'll be ready in 30 minutes. As she rode past Blackburn's men, they called out to her. "Evening, Miss Holloway," one of them said, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "Hope you don't mind the company, just following the law." Samantha forced herself to nod curtly without responding. Inside the house, she moved quickly, gathering supplies: jerky, coffee, flour, medical supplies, and ammunition. She changed into her sturdiest clothes and packed a single change of clothing. Everything else would have to be left behind. As she worked, she found herself pausing before the small photograph of her parents on their wedding day, the only image she had of her mother, who had died when Samantha was just 10 years old. Impulsively, she wrapped the frame in a shirt and tucked it into her saddlebag. Outside, she could hear a commotion beginning. Cooper's distraction was underway. A gunshot rang out, followed by shouts from Blackburn's men. Through the window, she saw several of them mounting up, riding toward the sound. Taking advantage of the confusion, Samantha slipped out the back door and made her way to the barn where Nathan waited with their horses. Cooper set fire to an old haystack on the north boundary, he explained as he helped secure her supplies. Made it look like rustlers. Most of Blackburn's men took the bait. "What about Jenkins? Already moving the first group of cattle toward the east draw. We need to join him." Nathan paused, looking at her intently. "Are you ready for this? Once we start the drive, there's no turning back." Samantha took a deep breath, glancing back at the house that had been her home her entire life. "Yes," she said finally. "Let's go." They rode out along a back trail, keeping to the shadows. In the distance, they could see the glow of the burning haystack and hear occasional shouts as Blackburn's men investigated. The diversion was working perfectly. They reached the main herd just as Jenkins was guiding the lead steers into the mouth of the draw. Cooper joined them minutes later, grinning with satisfaction. "Blackburn's boys will be chasing shadows all night," he reported. "I left enough tracks heading north to keep them busy until morning." "Good work," Nathan said. "Let's move. We need to be well away from here by dawn." The night drive was slow and treacherous. Moving cattle in darkness was risky. A spooked steer could start a stampede that would alert Blackburn's men for miles. They worked in near silence, using hand signals and quiet whistles to communicate. Samantha rode alongside Nathan at the head of the herd, guiding the cattle through the familiar terrain. Despite the circumstances, she found a certain peace in the rhythm of the drive, the soft lowing of the cattle, the steady pace of her horse, the vast canopy of stars overhead. "You're good at this," Nathan observed quietly as they guided the lead steers around a difficult bend. "Most ranchers I know talk about cattle work, but you actually do it." "My father believed in working alongside his hands," Samantha replied. "Said you can't ask a man to do something you wouldn't do yourself." She glanced at Nathan. "You never finished telling me why you're really here." Nathan was silent for so long that Samantha thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. "My full name is Nathan Yates. 15 years ago, my father was Thomas Yates of the Circle Y in northern Colorado." Samantha frowned. "The Circle Y? I've heard that name." "It was one of the largest spreads in Colorado Territory," Nathan continued. "Until Edgar Blackburn and his partners drove us out." Samantha reined her horse to a stop. "Blackburn, the same Blackburn," Nathan nodded grimly. "The very same. He wasn't always a cattle baron. Back then, he was working for the railroad, identifying properties along planned routes. He approached my father with an offer for our land, an insultingly low offer. When Pa refused, accidents started happening. Cattle disappeared, fences were cut, our barn burned down. Just like what's been happening at the Double H," Samantha murmured. "Exactly like that," Nathan confirmed. "When those tactics didn't work, Blackburn forged loan documents, claimed my father owed money he'd never borrowed." "Sound familiar?" Samantha's eyes widened. "So when you heard about the trouble at my ranch?" "I knew exactly who was behind it," Nathan finished. "I've been tracking Blackburn's operations for years, waiting for a chance to bring him down legally. When I heard he was trying to force you off your land, I saw an opportunity to finally stop him. So I am just a cause to you," Samantha said, hurt evident in her voice. "A means to your revenge." "No," Nathan replied firmly. "That's how it started, I won't lie about that, but it's not why I stayed." His eyes held hers in the moonlight. "I stayed because of you, Samantha, because I've never met anyone with your courage and determination. Because watching you fight for your land reminded me of everything I once believed in and had given up on." Before Samantha could respond, Cooper rode up from the rear of the herd. "Riders coming," he reported tersely. "Fast from the direction of the ranch. How many?" Nathan asked, instantly alert. "Can't tell for sure, at least 4, maybe more." "They must have figured out our diversion," Nathan said. "We need to move faster." He turned to Samantha. "There's a box canyon about 2 miles ahead, just off the main trail. We could hold up there, make a stand if necessary." Samantha shook her head. "Too risky. If they corner us there, we'd be trapped," she thought quickly. "There's another way. Red Rock Pass, about 3 miles east of here. It's narrow and steep, but the cattle can make it in single file. Blackburn's men might not know about it. It's an old Indian trail my father discovered years ago." Nathan studied her face, then nodded. "Lead the way." They changed course, pushing the cattle harder than was ideal. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew steadily closer. Jenkins and Cooper took positions at the rear of the herd, ready to hold off Blackburn's men if necessary. As they approached the hidden trail to Red Rock Pass, Samantha's heart sank. In the pale moonlight, she could make out fresh hoofprints leading toward the pass. "Someone's been here recently," she told Nathan. Blackburn must know about the trail after all. Nathan's expression grew grim. Then we make our stand here. He gestured to a rocky area just ahead. That formation gives us good cover and a clear view of anyone approaching. Get the cattle into that small valley beyond. Cooper, Jenkins, and I will hold them off. I'm staying with you, Samantha insisted. This is my fight too. Samantha, don't argue, she cut him off. I can shoot as well as any of you, and I know this land better. After a moment's hesitation, Nathan nodded. All right, Jenkins, get the cattle secured, then circle back. They positioned themselves among the rocks, rifles ready. In the distance, they could hear the approaching riders closer now, moving fast. Remember, Nathan said quietly, we're defending ourselves from cattle rustlers with forged documents. No unnecessary killing. Minutes later, 6 riders appeared, silhouetted against the night sky. Reeves was in the lead, his distinctive profile unmistakable even in the darkness. That's far enough, Nathan called out when they were within earshot. This herd belongs to the Double H Ranch and we're taking it to market legally. Reeves reined his horse to a stop, the others following suit. Now, that's where you're wrong, Yates. We have a court order authorizing us to impound these cattle for unpaid debts. What you're doing is rustling, plain and simple. Your court order is based on forged documents, Nathan replied, just like the ones Blackburn used in Colorado 15 years ago. A murmur ran through the men behind Reeves. Samantha realized that Nathan was deliberately sowing doubt among Blackburn's regular hands men who might be willing to intimidate a woman rancher but would balk at outright murder. I don't know what you're talking about, Reeves said smoothly. But I do know we have the law on our side, so why don't you all come out from behind those rocks and we can settle this civilly? The only thing you have on your side is Blackburn's money, Samantha called out. Everyone in the territory knows he's trying to steal my land. Miss Holloway, Reeves replied, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, I've been patient because you're a woman. That patience is running out. I'd rethink your position, Reeves, Cooper added. 4 rifles against 6 pistols? Those aren't good odds even for a gunslinger like you. Reeves smiled coldly. Who said anything about 6? He raised his hand, and suddenly the ridge behind them was lined with more riders, at least 8 or 10, all armed. We've been watching the ranch for days, Reeves said. Did you really think we wouldn't anticipate your move? Blackburn wants that land, and he's going to get it one way or another. Nathan exchanged a worried glance with Samantha. They were badly outnumbered with no chance of escape. Last chance, Reeves called. Surrender the herd and Miss Holloway can keep her life, if not her ranch. Resist, and none of you will see morning. Time seemed to stand still as Samantha weighed their options. Surrender meant losing everything her father had built. Fighting meant certain death. In that moment of desperate consideration, the sound of a gunshot rang out, but not from Reeves or his men. It came from behind them, from the direction of the pass. U.S. Marshals, a voice boomed. Drop your weapons. Confusion erupted among Blackburn's men as more riders appeared, these wearing badges that caught the moonlight. Reeves turned his horse, clearly preparing to flee, when a single shot knocked him from his saddle. In the chaos that followed, Blackburn's men surrendered quickly, throwing down their weapons as marshals surrounded them. A tall man with a silver star on his vest approached the rocks where Samantha and Nathan were sheltered. Deputy Marshal James Wilson, he introduced himself. Sorry we cut it so close, had a hard time tracking you after you left the main trail. Nathan emerged from cover, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. Uncle James, how did your telegram reached me in Cheyenne, Wilson replied with a smile. Soon as I read about Blackburn pulling the same land scheme again, I gathered every available marshal and headed north. He looked past Nathan to where Samantha stood. Miss Holloway, I presume your father was a good man. Thomas spoke highly of him. My father knew Nathan's father, Samantha asked, confusion evident in her voice. Wilson nodded. They served together in the war. When Thomas Yates was driven off his land, your father offered him shelter for a time. He glanced at Nathan. You never told her, Nathan shook his head. I only found out myself recently when I was going through my father's papers. That's how I knew where to find the double H when I heard Blackburn was causing trouble again. Samantha stared at Nathan, a mix of emotions playing across her face. So my father and yours were friends, and you came here not just to stop Blackburn, but because of that connection. Yes, Nathan admitted. I should have told you sooner, but I wasn't sure how much you knew, or if you'd trust me if you knew I had personal reasons for being here. Marshal Wilson cleared his throat. Well, you'll have plenty of time to sort that out. Right now, we need to secure these prisoners and document Blackburn's illegal activities. We've been building a case against him for months: land fraud across 3 territories, bribery of officials, even suspected murder. What about his claim against my ranch? Samantha asked. The documents are forgeries, Wilson confirmed. Expert work, but forgeries nonetheless. We have a witness, Blackburn's former clerk, who's testifying about the whole operation. Your ranch is safe, Miss Holloway. Relief washed over Samantha, so powerful she had to steady herself against a rock. After months of fighting, of lying awake at night wondering if she'd lose everything, it was over. What about the cattle drive? Cooper asked. Do we still need to get to Billings? Wilson shrugged. That's up to Miss Holloway. Blackburn will be facing charges, but these things take time. Having money in the bank wouldn't hurt while the legal proceedings unfold. Samantha looked at Nathan, who had been watching her silently. What do you think? She asked. I think we've come this far, he replied with a small smile. Might as well finish what we started. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, Samantha sat with Nathan on a rocky outcrop, watching as the marshals secured their prisoners for the journey back to town. Cooper and Jenkins were tending the herd, preparing to continue the drive once the excitement had died down. I still can't believe it's over, Samantha said softly. After months of fighting, just like that, Blackburn is finished. Not just like that, Nathan corrected her. You stood your ground when most would have given up. That's what gave us time to build the case against him. Us. Samantha raised an eyebrow. You've been working with the marshals all along. Nathan nodded. After I turned in my badge, I couldn't let go of what Blackburn had done to my family. When I heard rumors he was up to his old tricks in Montana, I contacted my uncle. We'd been gathering evidence for months, but we needed a clear case of attempted land theft to make the charges stick. He looked at her apologetically. In a way, I used your situation to finally bring him down. You could have told me, Samantha said, hurt evident in her voice. I wanted to many times, Nathan replied, but the fewer people who knew about the investigation, the better our chances of catching Blackburn red-handed. He hesitated. And then, as I got to know you, I was afraid you'd think less of me for having ulterior motives. Samantha was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. So what happens now? She finally asked. You'll testify against Blackburn, then move on to the next crusade. Nathan turned to face her directly. That depends. On what? On whether there's a reason for me to stay, he said quietly. I came to the Double H with a mission, Samantha, but somewhere along the way, the mission became secondary to something else entirely. And what would that be? Samantha asked, her heart beating faster despite her attempt to remain composed. You, Nathan said simply. I've spent 15 years looking backwards, seeking justice for my father. Working alongside you these past weeks has made me look forward for the first time. He took a deep breath. I know the Double H is your legacy, your home. I would never presume to claim any part of it. But if you could use a foreman, someone to help you build it into everything your father dreamed it could be, I'd like to apply for the position. A smile slowly spread across Samantha's face. A foreman, Mr. Yates, is that really the position you're interested in? Nathan's eyes held her steadily. For now, unless you might consider a more permanent partnership someday. Samantha reached out and took his hand. I might, she said softly. But I'd need to be sure my potential partner was being completely honest with me from now on. No more secrets. No more secrets, Nathan agreed, squeezing her hand. I promise. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the land that Samantha had fought so hard to protect, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The battle for the Double H was won, but a new chapter was just beginning, one that held the promise of something her father had always wanted for her. Not just a legacy of land, but a future filled with love. "You know," she said, standing and pulling Nathan to his feet beside her, "I think I've changed my mind about the cattle drive." "Oh," Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Having second thoughts about Billings?" "No," Samantha replied with a smile. "But I think the Double H can spare its foreman for a few weeks. Let Cooper and Jenkins handle the drive with the marshals as escort. I'd rather go home." "Home?" Nathan repeated, surprise evident in his voice. "Yes, home," Samantha confirmed, her eyes bright with emotion. "I've been so focused on fighting to keep it that I haven't actually enjoyed it in months." She looked up at him. "And I think it's time you saw the Double H not as a battlefield, but as what it truly is, the most beautiful piece of land God ever created, according to my father." "I'd like that," Nathan said softly. "Very much." As they walked back toward their horses, Nathan stopped suddenly and turned to face her. "There's one thing I've been wanting to do since the day I rode onto your ranch," he said, his voice low. "What's that?" Samantha asked, though something in his eyes told her she already knew the answer. Instead of replying, Nathan gently cupped her face in his hands and kissed her softly at first, then with growing intensity as she responded, wrapping her arms around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Nathan smiled. "Well, Miss Holloway, I believe I've just staked my claim more effectively than any legal document could." Samantha laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Just remember, Mr. Yates," she teased, "on the Double H I'm still the boss." "Yes, madam," Nathan replied, his eyes twinkling, "though I reserve the right to offer my professional opinion from time to time." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Samantha said, taking his hand as they walked toward a future neither could have imagined just weeks before. 5 years later, the Double H had grown into one of the most prosperous ranches in Montana Territory. The railroad spur that Blackburn had schemed to control now passed through a corner of Double H land that Nathan and Samantha had willingly sold at a fair price, using the proceeds to expand their cattle operation and build a new, larger home. Edgar Blackburn had been convicted of multiple counts of fraud and was serving time in a federal prison. His empire had been dismantled, with much of his land returned to the smaller ranchers he had driven out. On a warm summer evening, Nathan stood on the porch of their home, watching as Samantha taught their 3-year-old daughter, Emma, how to feed a bottle calf. Thomas, their infant son, slept peacefully in a cradle nearby named for both their fathers. Marshal James Wilson, now retired, sat in a rocking chair enjoying the scene. "You know, Nathan," he said reflectively, "your father and Samuel Holloway used to talk about their children running these lands together someday. Don't think even they imagined it quite like this, though." Nathan smiled, watching as his daughter giggled when the calf butted eagerly against the bottle. "No, probably not, but I like to think they'd approve." "Oh, they would," Wilson assured him. "No doubt about that." As the sun set over the mountains, casting the valley in golden light, Samantha looked up and caught Nathan's gaze. The love that passed between them in that moment needed no words. It was as vast and enduring as the land they had fought for and now cherished together. The Double H had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger. And when visitors asked about the ranch's history, the story always began the same way, with a determined young woman who refused to surrender her legacy and the cowboy who had vowed they would take it only over his saddle.